Morning smelled like haste, and coffee, bitter, like reality itself. Aylin jumped out of the minibus, clutching the folder with her drawings as if it were a life preserver. The city was already awake, cars rushing by, glass office buildings reflecting the sun, people walking, confident, busy, distant. And she was simply running late for her very first job interview at the largest construction company in the city, Arslan Construction. "Please let me make it," Aylin whispered, clutching the drawings tighter against her chest. "Please don't let me be late." The elevator felt endlessly slow. On the 15th floor, at the very end of the corridor, awaited a door with a plaque. Demir Arslan, CEO. Inhale, exhale. Knock or run away. Aylin made her choice and walked in. And in that single moment, everything went wrong. She froze for a heartbeat. Standing before her was a man who looked as if he'd stepped off the cover of an architectural magazine, tall, impeccably dressed, with a cold, sharply focused gaze. He turned toward her, and right then, the paper cup slipped from her trembling hands. Hot coffee spilled across Demir's perfectly white shirt. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." Aylin grabbed a napkin and tried wiping the stain, only smearing it worse. "Leave it." His voice sounded like a command, calm, icy, immovable. No yelling, no emotion, just that chilling steadiness. "You're here for the interview?" "Yes, probably not anymore. I should just leave," she muttered, feeling her pulse hammering in her temples. He looked at her for another moment, as if seeing straight through her. "Architect. Almost. Not certified yet. But I can work. I work hard." He didn't respond. Instead, he nodded to his secretary. "Replace the coffee, and take Miss Cotta downstairs." And that was how her career at Arslan Construction ended, before it ever began. That evening, Eileen sat by the window in her tiny apartment, holding that same cup, now empty. "Figures," she murmured. One step toward the dream, then coffee all over the suit of destiny. She opened her laptop. Her inbox silent. No new projects. Debts growing. Only the photograph of her parents on the wall whispered, "Don't give up." The next day, her phone rang. "Miss Cotta," a steady male voice asked. "Yes?" "This is Mr. Arslan's office. He requests that you come in today." "Why? I I ruined everything." "Apparently not. He wants to discuss an offer." Eileen stood before the glass doors again. Same walls, same corridor, and the same feeling that she was being pulled into a game whose rules she didn't know. Demirway sat behind his desk, skimming documents. He didn't look up. "Sit." She obeyed, her throat suddenly dry. "He needs you to play a role." "Excuse me?" "Don't worry, not an actress on stage." Only then he lifted his eyes to hers. "I need investors to believe I have a fiancé." Eileen blinked. "And you chose me? After the coffee incident and the disaster of yesterday?" "You're the only one who doesn't pretend." A hint of irony touched his cold tone. "And you have expressive eyes. People trust them." Eileen didn't know whether to laugh or run, but then she remembered the bills, the rent, her brother. And what role exactly? Simple. 3 months. You're my fiancé. And I get compensation, a generous one. And if I refuse? For the first time, he smiled, coldly, almost weightlessly. You won't. When she left his office, the city looked different. Everything too bright, as if someone had turned up the contrast of life. Eileen stopped at a cafe window, catching her reflection and barely recognizing herself. A girl who was about to sign a contract, not for work, for feelings.
Eileen stood before the glass doors, gripping the strap of her bag as if her life depended on it. Rain whispered against the windows as if the city itself was warning her. Careful. She stepped inside. Demir sat behind a massive black wood desk, as though he were the center of his own world, one in which everything was under control. Only this time, there was something different in his eyes. Not cold, not harsh, just tired. Sit, he said shortly, without even lifting his head. Eileen sat down, feeling her heel catch on the carpet. She wished she could disappear, but instead she cleared her throat awkwardly. I don't quite understand why you called me here. I don't quite understand why I agreed, he replied quietly, setting his pen aside. But let's speak plainly. I need you to temporarily become part of a certain story. A story? Mine. He finally looked up and met her gaze. You will become my fiancé. Silence fell like a thick wall. Lightning flashed outside. Eileen blinked as if she hadn't heard correctly. Excuse me? This is not a proposal. This is a contract. 3 months. You will be beside me, at meetings, with investors, at events. Your task is to convincingly play the role of a woman who is connected to me. Why? A deal with foreign partners. They need stability and image. Their capital is built on families, not single men. I need to show them that I can not only construct buildings, but also build a life. She stayed silent for a long moment. At first, she wanted to laugh, then simply stand up and leave. But the memory of her brother, the unpaid rent, and a kitchen with nothing but a bag of pasta stopped her. And how much does the role pay? Enough for you to forget your debts. She exhaled quietly. All right. Demir raised an eyebrow. No hesitation? I'm an architect, she said calmly. Sometimes to build a house, you have to lay a foundation out of someone else's stones. A faint smile touched his lips. You're a strange woman, Ms. Kara. I know. Later, as Eileen walked out of the office with the folder of documents, she felt that she was leaving behind more than just a cold office, but crossing an invisible line. She didn't know that at that very moment, Demir was watching her go, watching longer than he should have. That evening, in her apartment, Eileen reread the contract. Section 7.3. Emotional involvement of the parties is not anticipated. She let out a short, ironic breath. Of course, emotions on schedule, she whispered, closing the document. It's only 3 months. What could possibly happen? But somewhere inside, something stirred. Not fear, not joy. Something undefined. Like a quiet premonition,
that this contract was not just a job. The estate's courtyard stretched out like an alley from an old film. White marble, fountains, glass, steel. Demir's house wasn't a home at all, but perfect geometry. Aylin stood at the gates, feeling like a visitor in a museum. "Welcome, Ms. Kara," the butler said, taking her suitcase. She stepped inside. Space, silence, the scent of fresh wood and coffee. Everything was flawless, yet nothing felt lived in. In the living room, Demir stood by the window, a cup in his hand. "You have a room on the second floor," he said, without turning. "But remember, everything that happens here must look natural, especially to those who will see us. I'm not an actress. That's exactly why I chose you." She didn't answer. She simply walked upstairs, avoiding his gaze. But at the doorway, she turned. He was still standing by the window, in profile, as if carved from another world. That night, Aylin couldn't fall asleep. Rain drummed against the glass. Somewhere downstairs, she heard the faint tapping of keys. Demir was working even at 2 in the morning. And suddenly, she felt sorry for him. She didn't understand why. The next day began exactly on schedule. Joint breakfast, a photo shoot for the corporate magazine, a walk through the garden for the investors. She tried to smile, but felt like a doll in a shop window. Only one moment felt real, when they accidentally collided in the corridor, and her hand brushed against his. He flinched. She did too, but both of them felt the same truth in that brief touch. Too much for strangers, too dangerous for more. The whole shimmered with light and glamour. The music was expensive, polished, soulless. Aylin stood beside Demir with a smile she had practiced in front of the mirror. She wore a dress she hadn't chosen, jewelry she had never owned, and on her face a smile of a woman she wasn't. "It's all right," Demir murmured, sensing how tightly she gripped her glass. "Of course," Aylin replied, without looking at him. "You're used to everything being all right." He smirked faintly. "And you're used to everything being heartfelt." She wanted to respond with something sharp, but stayed silent. Not because she couldn't, but because for the first time his voice held no cold irony. There was interest. "Mr. Arslan," a man with a broad smile approached them. "And this is your fiancée? What a beauty!" Demir nodded. "Aylin." And then he took her hand. A simple gesture, part of the charade, yet his fingers were warm, steady, and she couldn't let go. When camera flashes erupted, he leaned toward her and whispered, "Smile, Aylin. That's all that's required of you." "And if I can't?" "Then pretend. In that you seem to be quite the professional." She slightly frowned, but a moment later everything went off script. One of the journalists called out, "Miss Kara, how did you two meet?" Aylin froze. According to the contract, the story was pre-written, but the words wouldn't come out. Before she could falter, Demir stepped closer, and suddenly, in front of everyone, he leaned in and kissed her. Something had changed since that night. Demir had become different. He was no longer just the cold boss. Sometimes, in his eyes, something human flickered. At times, even care. Eileen noticed how he watched her secretly, in the mornings, at breakfast, in the evenings when she read by the window. He never crossed boundaries, never allowed himself too much, but there was a strange warmth in his silence. One evening, as she sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea, Demir walked in. "Are you building something?" he asked. "What?" "Every night you sit with that same expression, as if you're drafting a plan in your mind." Eileen smiled. "Maybe I am. I just think that a house without a soul is nothing but walls." "You're talking about my house?" "About your heart." He froze, caught off guard. Then he laughed softly, for the first time, genuinely. "You know how to say dangerous things, Miss Kara, and you know how to hide feelings, Mr. Arslan." He didn't answer, but when she rose to leave, his voice stopped her. "Eileen?" "Yes?" "Thank you for making this house warmer." The next day, at the construction site of a new project, she saw him in a new light. Demir commanded the workers, confident, collected, but when their eyes met, his armor cracked for a moment. He looked at her as if realizing for the first time that what he had feared all along wasn't love, but loss. That night, walking past his office, she heard his voice through the half-closed door. "No, I'm not planning to get married for real. It's just part of the deal. In a month, it will all be over." Her heart clenched. The phrase echoed like a gunshot. Just part of the deal. Eileen closed her eyes, not noticing the tears sliding down her cheek. The rain poured down as if trying to wash the entire city away. The sky was low and gray, just like his eyes today. Eileen stood under the awning near the office, wrapped in a light coat, waiting for the car. Beside her stood Kanan, Demir's friend and the company's lawyer. He was always attentive, slightly ironic, but kind. "You're tired," he said softly. "Demir isn't easy." "That's putting it mildly," Eileen smiled faintly. "He's like a skyscraper, tall, shiny, and absolutely without windows." Kanan laughed. "But you're an architect. Maybe you can figure out where to put one." She laughed too, light, alive. Then she turned and saw Demir. He was standing by the car, in the rain, motionless. No umbrella, no words, just watching. His gaze was icy. Eileen felt something inside her tear. "Get in," he said once they were alone in the car. The silence was thick, like a storm. He started the engine but didn't move. "Had a good time?" he asked. "What?" "With Kanan, you were laughing, very naturally. We were talking about you, actually." "Oh, really?" He gave a bitter smirk. "You discuss me with other men?" "I'm not," she exhaled. "God, Demir, are you jealous?" He looked her straight in the eyes. "Yes." The word hit the air like a strike. Simple, honest, dangerous. Eileen didn't know what to say. Her fingers trembled. "Why?" she began. But he cut her off. "Because I can't stand seeing you smile at someone else." She laughed, bitterly, painfully. "And what about Section 7.3? No emotions, no feelings, no involvement. Everything by the contract. The contract ended the moment you walked into my house." He reached toward her, but she recoiled. "You're lying, Demir. I heard you. In a month it will be over." He froze. "You misunderstood." "No, I understood perfectly." Eileen opened the door and stepped out into the rain. He jumped out after her, caught her by the hand. "Eileen, let go. Listen to me." "For what? So I can believe in something that isn't real again?" He stood there, soaked, furious, desperate. "I don't know how to do this, do you understand?
I don't know how to love. I know how to build structures, not relationships. But with you, everything collapses. I can't think about anything except you." Island stayed silent. Rain mixed with tears on her cheeks. "I never asked for this. I just wanted to be myself. But near you, I'm someone else." He stepped toward her. "Then let me build us, without a contract, without conditions." But she had already turned away. "You realized too late that you can't buy a heart." And she walked away, straight into the rain, without looking back.
A week passed. Aylin did not return. Demir's house had fallen into silence. He sat in his office, surrounded by papers he wasn't reading. His eyes simply slid over the lines. Sleep, appetite, thoughts, everything had vanished. Only one letter refused to leave him in peace. A letter from Keenan. Aylin found out the truth about the land under the project. The house where she grew up was among those your company demolished. She can't forgive that. Demir read the lines again and understood this was the end. He had always known that parcel was a sensitive one. He just never imagined chance would tie him to this woman, her childhood, her pain, his project. Aylin returned to the coastal town where her street once stood. Now unfamiliar buildings rose in its place, cold, identical, foreign. She walked between them and felt hollow inside. "Everything I ever built was on sand," she whispered. Demir arrived a few days later. No driver, no security, just himself. He found her on the shore, where waves crashed against the old stones. She didn't turn toward him. "Why are you here?" "To say I'm sorry." "Too late. I'm not making excuses. I built structures without thinking about the memories beneath them. Now I know." He stepped closer. "I want to build another house, on this spot. Not for investors, for you." She let out a bitter, tearful laugh. "You still think everything can be fixed with bricks?" He shook his head. "No. But maybe I can start with the foundation of honesty." Aylin looked at him, long, silently. The wind tugged at her hair, tears shimmered in her eyes, but not anger anymore, just exhaustion and the faint remains of hope. "If I agree, will you run again when things get hard?" "I've been running my whole life." "Enough," she exhaled. "Then build, but this time, not a house. Yourself."
Time passed slowly, like rain suspended in the air. Aylin no longer waited for calls, didn't check her email, didn't remember, or rather tried not to. Sometimes, waking in the middle of the night, she thought she could hear his footsteps in the corridor again, steady, distant, familiar. Sometimes she heard his voice, lingering somewhere on the edge of a dream. But she would wake up and realize it was only the wind. Demir worked without pause. His name kept appearing in business news. Contracts were signed one after another, but none of it meant anything anymore. He tried to convince himself that Eileen had been just a chapter, one that had ended. But every time he walked past the empty living room, where the faint scent of her coffee still lingered, he understood the book wasn't closed. One day he entered her old room. On the windowsill lay her notebook. On the first page, a sketch, a house by the sea. Underneath it, written in her hand, a home where people feel, not perform. Demir stared at the drawing for a long time. Then he picked up his phone. Find me a plot by the shore, where Cara Street used to be.
Spring came early. The air smelled of salt, construction, and beginnings. Eileen returned to the seaside to say goodbye to her past. But when she reached the shore, she froze. Where the empty lot once stood, there were walls now, new, white, clean. A house, but not cold like Demir's. This one felt alive, with a veranda, open windows, and a view of the sea. On the fence hung a sign, Island Project. She stepped closer, and she saw him. Demir stood at the entrance, wearing a work shirt, hands covered with dust. No suit, no pretense, no polished arrogance, just a man. What is this?" she breathed. He smiled. "Your home." "Why?" "Because I destroyed something precious to you. I want to give at least part of it back." "And you think a house will fix everything?" He moved closer. "No, only you can fix it, if you forgive me." She stayed silent for a long moment. Then she took his hand, hesitantly, as if checking whether this was a dream. "And if I can't forgive?" "Then I'll simply stay beside you. No contracts, no promises." Eileen lowered her gaze, then whispered softly, "When I first saw you, you were cold. And now, you're home." Chapter 10. Love Without Conditions. The house stood on the shore where waves met the sunset. Eileen was planting flowers on the veranda. Demir helped, awkwardly, but sincerely. "You hold a shovel like a man who's only ever held a pen," she laughed. "And you laugh like someone who's finally home." They fell silent. The breeze played with Eileen's hair, and the sun gilded the walls. The quiet was light, like breathing. In the evening, they sat by the fire near the water. He looked at her, calmly, deeply, with a warmth he had never known before. "I've spent years building structures," Demir said, "but I finally realized what matters isn't the roof above your head, it's the person standing under it with you." "And who's the architect now?" He took her hand. "You are. It was always you." She rested her head on his shoulder. The sea murmured steadily, like a heart that had finally found its rhythm. And as the first stars rose above the water, Eileen whispered softly, "The contract is over." "Yes, but love has only just begun."